Hey, everybody. My name is Maria Pearman. We've got a webinar starting this morning here at 9:30 Pacific, and it's about that time, so I'm going to get started. I am so thankful to Todd and ADI for having me as a guest on today's webinar. Um, I'm going to be talking about budgeting, and to give you a little background as to why that's the topic that I'm discussing, I'll tell you about my background. I'm a CPA and I specialize in beverage alcohol, focus a lot of work with breweries and distilleries. And when I work with companies, budgeting is one of the common topics that we talk about. Budgeting is really critical for driving a management tool that you can actively use in your business to make sure that the results of your company are going in the direction that you want them to go. And a lot of people think about budgets as something that you just sort of create in the fall of the year before you set it, and oftentimes it just goes into a desk drawer, never to be looked at or consulted again. But in truth, building a budget is a very active process. Um, so I wanted to share with you some of the different types of budgets that you can build, some best practices of how to incorporate them into the management of your company, because it truly is a game changer. So I'm, as I mentioned, a CPA. In my day-to-day work, I usually function as a CFO for distilleries and breweries. And I have written a book for ADI called Distillery Finance. So a lot of the topics that I'm covering today, as well as a basic Finance 101, can be found in that Distillery Finance book. And that's available through White Mule Press, which is ADI's publishing arm. So I also think that this webinar is being recorded and will be available after the fact, but I'll, I think that's the case, but don't hold me to that. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. I've got a couple of slides and Excel docs that I'm going to be going over with you today. So, it's funny. I just had the slide shared a few minutes ago, and now it's not showing up. So, hmm. Well, hang on just a second. Let me try to get this going. There we go. Now it's like magically there. Okay. So apologies in advance. There are a lot of pictures in this slide deck that are wine oriented, because I think the last time that I spoke on this topic, it was to a group that was focused on wine. So you can, in your mind, imagine that these are distillery focused pictures. But in today's journey, we're going to talk about the purpose of a budget, the budget process, and how you can use that to drive alignment within your teams, and what it means to build a budget in detail. So, the budget is your financial roadmap to achieve company goals. It expresses the guideposts in dollars so that a company can see if they're on track to meet expectations. This is so helpful because if your goal as a company is to be the best distillery in your town, that's a very nebulous, undefined goal. And the process of writing a budget forces you to take whatever budget you have and put it into a measurable result so that you can see if you're actually achieving and attaining the tangible metrics that help you achieve that intangible goal. So the best distillery in my town might mean that I'm financially solvent, I cash flow positive, I make a margin of X amount on my products, whatever it is that results in being the best in your town. Of course, there are things like quality, but you're not going to you're not going to achieve best of until you've got that financial foundation in place. So a budget helps define measurable goals that you can then track against to see if you're meeting them, and by giving you guideposts along the way. So let's take another goal. Let's say that your goal is to make $500,000 of net income this year. So as you're tracking through the year on a month by month budget, you can see what you really need to be tracking at in April to achieve that at the end of December. And if you're way off track early in April, you still have time to course correct or adjust your expectations through the year. So it's a way for you to see, am I on pace with where I want to be at the end of said time frame? And said time frame is usually 1 year. There are different budget methodologies that we'll talk about. There's a static budget, flexible budget, and a rolling forecast. So, a static budget is what I referred to a few minutes ago, where you establish it once and then you never really update it. And that's not to mean that you don't look at it and use it, but it is that whatever you set in, say, Q4 of the prior year, that stays the same throughout the coming year, regardless of how circumstances may change. So you can imagine how this would have unfolded in 2020. You write a budget in Q4 of 19, you get to 2020, and then the world completely turns upside down. So what you budgeted is nowhere near realistic for what is actually happening. Now, that's a dramatic example, but I think you get the point that a static budget um, is helpful to some degree, but there are often things that change, and you're not going to be able um, to adjust your expectations, even if what you want is no longer a realistic expectation. But static budget is kind of set it, deal with that through the year, don't make any adjustments. A flexible budget is one in which you update for actual sales volume. And this can be really helpful when it comes to cost management. So, in a flexible budget, you might write a budget for selling 100 cases, and you've got your budget for what you want for revenue, COGS, operating expenses set at that 100 case level. But let's say in reality that you sold 80 cases. Well, with a flexible budget, you can adjust your budget numbers for that month down to the 80 case volume that you actually sold. And so this helps you see, like, is my cost in line with the volume that I sold? Um, the reason why this is helpful is because with cost of goods, most of the elements that are within cost of goods are variable costs as opposed to fixed costs. Variable costs mean that each unit that goes into the build of that assembly is a set amount. So if you manufacture and sell one unit, and let's pretend it's $3. If you sell one unit, then the COGS is $3. If you sell two units, the COGS is $6, and so on. And so if you were to look at a static budget that's just set at 100 case units and you actually sell 80, you're going to look like your revenue and your COGS were a real miss. Now, when you look at that same cost structure but pull it down to an 80 cases sold scenario, that's a lot different, because although there's still a miss on the revenue, the cost structure might be different. So, in the case of where you sold 100 cases and you're comparing your actual COGS for 80 cases and you're saying, wow, congratulations to me, my COGS were way under budget. Well, that's because you sold 20 less units. But when you look at it apples to apples, and the relationship between revenue and COGS and operating expenses at a certain level of sales, that brings things into perspective a lot more differently. And we're going to look at an example here in a moment. A rolling forecast is sort of, the advanced level of budgeting, and it's something that it takes a lot of companies some time to get to that point. It's a really aspirational goal when it comes to budgets. So, with a rolling forecast, you are updating the budget on a continual basis. We're in September right now, so let's pretend that we get to October. We're closing the month of September. As part of the September close, we're going to go to our budget document, and in the column that used to be September 23 budget, we're going to replace that with September 23 actual. Then, if you can imagine, we're looking forward in time, and we've got October budget, November budget, December budget, and so on. So we would have 12 months into the future continuously budgeted. So as you close September, you're going to take the actual of September and use that data to inform what the budgeted September 24 would be. And this makes budgeting become sort of the within the heart and soul of the culture of the company, because all of your team members are constantly thinking about, okay, what did we experience this month and how does that inform what we're going to experience over the coming 12 months? And budgeting just becomes a normal part of your monthly financial review process. And a lot of times clients will find that uh, if you're doing a static budget and you're just writing it in Q4, it is sort of an all encompassing project. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy. And if you're, a team that is short staffed for whatever reason, it can cause you, something's going to drop, right? Like if you're short staffed and you got to put attention towards writing a budget, you don't have the same resources to put towards your regular production or your regular sales. So it can be challenging for people to carve out the time to do a budget as a once a year sort of big event. That's why with a rolling forecast, it does take more time each month, but it becomes more of an ingrained habit and less of an arduous, large task that happens on an infrequent basis. So I highly recommend if you can get to the place where you've got the discipline to create a rolling forecast and update that on a monthly basis. That's best. So let me share with you an example of this. I'm going to pull up an Excel doc. Okay. So going through these tabs, I've got 3 tabs on this workbook: a static, flexible, and rolling forecast. So with a static budget, I mean, this is very minimal. I just have in here cases sold and then sales, COGS, gross margin, expenses, net income. But you can see there's a column for budget versus actual and then a variance column. And the variance column, it's always really important to review the variance column because it shows you quite starkly, what is the difference between what we expected and what we got. And as you review the variance question, the importance is to ask why. It's not a matter of punishing yourself or anyone else. It is a matter of understanding, why did we get a different result than what we expected? And is there any learning here that we can take forward into future periods to start to shift our operations and move ourselves towards our desired endpoint? You might also find out that that desired endpoint just really isn't attainable. And in that case, maybe you want to restate. And we'll talk about restating budgets later on in the presentation. But this is a very traditional budget. You can see the difference between what you expected and what you got. Now, if we ratchet up a little bit and go to something that's a little more advanced, that's the flexible budget. So in this, what you can see is we took our budgeted numbers and we can toggle in here what the case number of actual sales was. So if you remember, going back to the first tab, we had budgeted 200 cases sold. So, I can go in and put in 200 cases and it gives me my budgeted outcome. Now I can change that to what we actually got. And now we can start to see, where we're really off. So if we look back here, I just want to do a little comparison. On the static budget, our we have we have budgeted $15,000 of COGS. We actually had 14,000 of COGS. So we had a variance of $1,000 to the positive, which means good job us. We didn't spend as much money on COGS. And then also down in expenses, we budgeted 12,000 in expenses. We only spent 10. We had a $2,000 savings versus our budget. Good job us. Well, okay, maybe, but let's look at that in a flexible environment. And in this flexible environment, we've got, you can see with our COGS that at this level of sales, we had budgeted, we should have spent 11,250 in COGS. We actually spent 14. So at that level of sales, we actually have a negative variance. So where we were patting ourselves on the back earlier, now it's like, what's going on there? How do I need to tweak my COGS so that even at a lower sales volume, it can still stay within my cost structure that works for my company. Likewise with expenses, with this, our expenses did stay the same at this flexible budget level. So we did truly have a positive savings there versus what we had budgeted. And so that's great. But it's a much different story when you couch your budget results in the sales volume that you actually experienced versus what you budgeted. So that's flexible. Going forward into rolling forecast, this is the one that's a little more advanced. And here you can see we've got budget versus actual for the month of April. So in this example, we're assuming that we just closed the month of April 23. So we've got our budgeted number for April, and then we're comparing that to our actual results from April. And there are some learnings there as you compare those two columns. And then as you move forward in the forecast, you can see that we've already budgeted out May and June. And this bracket here in this column, this means like sort of I'm asking you as the viewer to just imagine that there was July through March of next year already budgeted. And then we use the data that we have from actual 23 results to inform what we expect the budget of 24 to be. And this process would continue with the with the May close, with the June close, et cetera. So we keep building that consistent forward looking budget, always with 12 months in the future. So that's an idea of how these three budgets work, and they're all very helpful in their own way. So I'm going to stop sharing and go back to the PowerPoint slides. Okay, so you've got a budget. Now, how do you use this as a management tool? And this, I think, is the most powerful way for this is the most powerful tool that you have to drive accountability, alignment, and results in your organization. So, the budgeting process is a great way to create alignment within your team. And that is to say, like the budget process truly should involve all of your key stakeholders in the business. This is not something just created by the accountant or the CEO or whomever it is. It's not a one person show. It is a collaborative activity where you want to get the buy-in and the perspective of your key stakeholders. So usually it's going to be a process that lasts for months. Truly, with most of my clients, we start this in July. And it starts in July with determining what our sales menu is going to be for the coming year. Sales menu being what are the SKUs we're going to be offering. In addition to that, contemplating which new markets might we be entering. Are there any markets that we're going to close down? So things like that, just getting kind of a lay of the land of what we're going to sell, where we're going to sell it. So sales sets the tone, and that is you'll understand at the end of this presentation that the master budget is really made up of a series of lots of little budgets. So sales sets the tone. Once you've got your sales volume forecast in place, everything else flows from that. The sales volume forecast usually is going to be a spreadsheet where you've got all of your SKUs listed down the rows, and then you've got months in the columns, and within the columns, you're forecasting how many units of that SKU you're going to sell. Each different geography or each different distributor would have a separate tab. So if you have 5 different distributors, you would have a 5-tabbed Excel workbook with each of the sales volume forecasts in each tab. So then you take that sales volume forecast, which is in units, and then you have to convert it into dollars. and basically add up all the dollars from all the tabs. That becomes the basis of your sales forecast and the basis of your master budget. So this is a flow chart of the entire budget process. And in this example, we're assuming that there's a distillery that has wholesale sales, that has their own tasting room with a food element to it, and merchandise as well. So you can see the top level of sales budgets. We've got wholesale sales, tasting room sales, and merchandise sales. So all of those three come first. And within tasting room sales, you can see the three lines that come down from that. There's on the sales level, there's spirit sales and food sales. And then the other one is tasting room labor. That's an expense, and we'll get to that in a second. But you take your spirit sales from the tasting room plus your wholesale sales, and that tells you how much you're going to sell total in spirits. Then from that spirit sales forecast, you can get your production team involved. So this is your head distiller, or perhaps you have your own head of production, whatever the case may be. Whoever is driving production would take that sales forecast, and they're going to start to crunch numbers, and they're going to use their planning software, whether it's something as simple as whiteboarding it or putting it on a spreadsheet, using a demand planning tool and software. Whatever the mechanism, they're basically going to work backwards from those sales and figure out when we need to produce the goods, package them, etc. So that production schedule comes on board. And if we follow down, going down from there, you can see that the production schedule is composed of three things: the raw materials, which of course makes sense, the production labor, and the capital expenses. And then, with spirits, there's this whole other element of considering what type of liquid is already in barrels and how does that play into things. When are those barrels going to mature, and when are they going to be ready to be harvested and put into bottles, or when do we need to blend things? So it can be, this production schedule can be a very complicated timeline to try to predict. Um, with the capital expenses that fall out of the production schedule, the idea there is that in the production schedule, you may find that, hey, we actually don't have enough equipment to produce at the level of sales that are projected. So that's the trigger that says, okay, we need to think about buying whatever piece of new equipment is needed to achieve that goal. Um, Now, I'm going to put an asterisk on that for a second, because I want you to just sort of fast forward and imagine what this might look like at the end of the budgeting process. It's quite common that a company may realize, actually, we don't have the cash to buy the equipment that we need. So instead of planning on buying equipment so that we can meet the needs of the sales forecast, we might need to pull back the sales forecast a little bit and rethink things. So I'll get to the explanation shortly about, going from the first blush budget to the final one. There's a lot of negotiation. There's a lot of refining that goes into it, but that's how capital expenses might play into things. On the tasting room budget, we've of course got the spirit sales, the food sales. So we also have labor and cogs in there. With food, you're going to have your food cogs. And with your tasting room, you got to man the tasting room. So that's tasting room labor as well. So thinking about those elements. Then on the merchandise side of things, for some of you, merchandise might be part of the tasting room, but I have it out here separately because, this is going to include anything that you sell online, anything that you sell at your tasting room or other retail environments. And also, I would encourage you to think about what sort of POS you're going to have for your wholesale sales teams, for your distributors. Um, you set your merchandise sales, and then you from there back into what your merchandise cogs will be. And then, of course, over on the right hand side, we have marketing and admin budgets as well. So these are service functions in the organization, and they are definitely related to revenue, but there's not a revenue center of their own for these marketing and admin budgets. All in, you're going to create sub budgets for each of the boxes that you see on the screen, and then you compile them all together. And that's usually the job of the accountant who will compile it together. So there are different players in the budget process. And basically, the process is that you have those departmental budgets, you consolidate them, so smush everything together. And then once you've smushed it together, you're going to see things that don't fit. Like maybe your first round budget has you losing $1 million and you say, oh, that's not going to work. So, it's expected, and you should not be surprised if things don't fit the first go around. They're not intended to. This is just everybody's best effort. Okay, let's take your best effort, put it together, and then see where we lie. Um, so obviously pieces don't fit, and you refine it, and you go through that process of refining 2 or 3 times, and then by about the third round you've got something that's pretty darn good. With the process of refining, what I recommend is take that consolidated budget where you put everybody's small budgets together into one large one, and then your key stakeholders get around a table and you beat it up and you challenge assumptions. Somebody says that you're going to sell 3,000 cases in X state, and somebody else at the table might say, how, show me how that's going to happen, show me the backup of that, is that reasonable? So that back and forth, you want to encourage some healthy debate, you want to encourage challenging assumptions, and at the end of that conversation, every person who has written a budget is going to walk away with notes of how they need to adjust their budget. And so, people go back to their corners, they rewrite the budget, make the changes that are necessary, send that back to the accountant. The accountant again smushes it all together, and then hopefully you've got something that fits a lot closer. So now at this point, it's more about, again, you're going to get around a table. Now it's more about sort of filing down the rough edges, because by and large, the puzzle pieces should fit. And now it's just a matter of, okay, we need to bring this up, pull this down, and fine tune our sales geography, maybe cut out this geography, something like that. So usually by the end of that second round of revisions, again, after that second round of beating it up, everybody will have notes. They go back to their corners, they implement the changes, send it again to the accountant. Again, the accountant smushes it together. And now you're looking at something that's pretty workable product. And at that point, maybe it's just, very minute changes, but you can continue the process for as many times as is needed to get it working in your organization. So, who's involved here? Role and responsibility. You've got the CFO, and that person is responsible for the final budget. It is their responsibility to build the budget. This person also usually is writing the admin budget. So, admin is everything that's not production or sales and marketing. It's all of the day-to-day expenses that are needed to make the company go. They also write the capital expense budget, informed by data from your production team. So as you're looking at the capital expenses that are needed to meet the sales plan, CFO is going to go price out those items, put them into a budget, and determine if that's feasible. The raw materials budget. So while the head of production is going to determine the quantity of raw materials, the CFO is usually translating that quantity budget into dollars. And so that means things like negotiating contracts with vendors, making sure that you've got the best price available, looking at alternative goods. And so, if you've got a raw materials budget that's too high, that CFO might think about what alternative raw materials might we use that could be swapped out at a lower cost. And usually this is in tandem. It's a conversation with the head of production or the head distiller. But at the end of the day, that raw materials budget is the responsibility of the CFO. And then finally, they project manage the whole process. So it is a group effort, but you do have to have a ringleader, and the CFO is the ringleader who's charting the milestones, giving the timelines and expectations to the rest of the team. The sales director will write the wholesale sales budget and the sales expense budget. Uh, no real surprise there. The restaurant or tasting room GM is going to write the sales budget for the restaurants or the tasting room and the merchandise. Now, in your organization, you may have someone who is solely over merchandise versus the tasting room GM who is solely over the tasting room. However, it breaks out in your organization, but both of those, the restaurants and the merchandise, need to have an owner of that budget. Head of production. So this person is responsible for COGS labor and the budget overhead. So COGS labor, is that head of production is charting out how we're going to fit in all of the production required to achieve the sales goal. Not only are they thinking about the raw materials and the units needed, but they're thinking, okay, what does this mean in terms of bodies? Do I have enough bodies? Do we need to make some hires? Do we need to give raises? That type of thing. Now, I will say that it is advised for each of these people to have at least one conversation with the CFO as they're writing their budget. And I'll give you an example. Let's say the head of production is writing the COGS labor budget, and maybe the CFO understands that health insurance is going to increase 7% next year, but the head of production wouldn't know that. So even if head of production knows what you're paying your production staff, there are these other elements of payroll that need to be baked in with the assistance of the CFO. The marketing director will cover all the marketing expense budget, and then the CEO is there to provide direction, approve the final budget, and hold the department heads accountable for the results. So, really, the CEO shouldn't be involved in the heavy lift of writing the budget. It should just be more of a presentation and getting their sign off and implementing any other information that person may know that the rest of the team isn't privy to. For example, if there's a distillery that is preparing for some type of merger or acquisition that only the CEO knows about, then there might be different decisions made in the budgeting process for the following year. The budget calendar. So what I have presented here is a budget calendar that goes for 4 months, and I've got some major milestones with listing the date, the responsible party, and the activity to be delivered at that date. The idea here is to give you a sense of the rhythm. So people need time to write a budget, so it's not feasible to have a budget meeting, talk about the changes that need to be made, and then expect them to be done in 2 days. You need to kind of give some time for people to work within those parameters. So the first milestone here, the responsible party is going to be everybody who's involved in the budgeting process. The activity is that the CFO will deliver sales budget worksheets to department heads. And a sales budget worksheet is usually in Excel. It's going to have columns for, like, let's pretend we're working on the 24 budget. So you would have January 24, January 23, January 22, back to back to back, so that you can get a sense of the movement and the historical performance over the past couple years. So really, to the best of your ability, have 2 prior years. One prior year can sort of hide anomalies that may have been unique to that period. So 2 is advised. And you're going to have that historical information available for the person to review. And you will then color in with yellow highlights the cells that you need your responsible party to enter in. So you're kind of giving the historical, giving them enough information to make assumptions about what to expect in the coming year, and then asking them to provide that to you. The second milestone involves the director of the restaurants or the tasting room, sales and marketing. And this is where they've taken your sales budget worksheet, completed it, give it to the CFO. Then the next milestone is that the expense budgets are delivered to the CFO. So The milestone on September 27th is sales budgets are submitted. And then after that, it'll be the expense budgets are submitted. Then the CFO has everything they need to consolidate all the budgets together. So the next step is that the CFO consolidates budgets, delivers them to the leadership team. That leadership team has, some time to look at it, review, contemplate, and then there's a budget work session. So now we're on 1025. That budget work session is usually like a 2-hour work session with all of those key responsible parties around the table, challenging assumptions, beating up what's in front of them, deciding how we need to shift things to make the puzzle pieces work. So then after that, the CFO is going to distribute updated budgets with notes from the work session. And a week after that, then the department heads make those changes, give it back to the CFO. That goes one more round. And then we get to November 29th, final leadership team work session. And all final changes are made. The CEO is signing off on the final budget, and then you issue those final corporate and departmental budgets, calling them, sort of, this is it, like pencils down, this is our budget. So that's kind of the flow of the budget process. And I think the main point that I want to drive home is that you've got to give some gaps of time between each step to allow people to really think through things thoroughly and work in this project into their regular day to day. And I hope that you can see that it takes quite a while for this to all come together. Okay, so we talked about a sales budget. I want to just show you a little bit about this. So a sales budget is going to be built by distributor, and if you have tasting rooms or membership clubs, you can consider those arms to be their own distributor. We've got sales volume by SKU, by month, and in units. So let me show you an example of this. Yeah, here we go. Okay. So here, this is a really condensed assumption. And you can see over on the left-hand side, we've got, this is basically, label one, label two, and this is going to be a core or year-round offering. And then we've got a seasonal section below with two other offerings here, label five, label six. And I'm just showing you like a real condensed snippet of what a sales volume forecast would look like. You've got the name of the SKU here. So this is going to be, and pardon, some of these sizes are in, beer sizes because I'm referencing barrels, but I think you get the point. Like this column here is your pack type. So it's going to be, 750s, 375s, etc. And then you've got that pack type identified by the brand. So this cell is your SKU. And then you're going across the months, and this is the number of units that you expect to sell in particular SKU month over month. And this is for one particular distributor. Then you've got a conversion over here where you're going to take this number that's in barrels and convert it to a case equivalent. And then you get your total case equivalents for that SKU for the year for the distributor. As we move over to the right, you can see this is where we are converting it to dollars. And if you take a look at the functions, we're using VLOOKUPs here. And basically, we're taking the number of units that we expect to sell. And for January, so we're going to take this 9 units, and then we're multiplying it by the rate, by the FOB for that particular distributor to understand what we sell in January. We follow that process along for all the months, all the SKUs, and then we get a total amount. So you're basically going to do that for every distributor on a separate tab. and then you add them all up to get the total for the year. Okay, let me go back to the slides. Okay, so that's a snippet of how the sales budget is going to be structured. And then calculating sales revenue, this is what I just walked through. So by distributor, you take your sales forecast by SKU by month. So this is the volume in units. Then you add a reference tab to that workbook that is your FOB pricing. The best way to do this is to export a price list for the distributor from your ERP. And this is assuming that you're using an ERP software. If you don't have software, then somewhere you have a list, an FOB list. So you would just put that FOB list into a separate reference tab, and then you're going to go and reference that, multiplying your volume by SKU times the FOB. So, and then the final note that I have on this tab is a roll up tab that consolidates revenue from all distributors. So this is going to be your summary tab. Budgeting raw materials. So how do you budget raw materials? You'll multiply the COGS per case per SKU by the quantity of budgeted sales for each month. So you're basically taking that sales volume forecast and using that volume, but instead of multiplying by your FOB, you're going to be multiplying by the cost of the raw materials that's in each unit of each SKU. So the best way to achieve this is, again, assuming that you use software, inventory management software or an ERP software, you'll generate a bill of materials report for all of your finished goods and then create a COGS spreadsheet. So the first tab will list the COGS by case, by item. The second tab is going to be a copy of the sales forecast roll up from your sales budget. And then another tab calculates the product of the COGS per case times quantity sold. Okay. So it seems very detailed, and it is, but you're going to get very accurate results when you're using the bill of materials from your actual production to forecast what your budgeted COGS will be. So, the cardinal rule of using budgeting to drive accountability is to only hold people accountable for factors within their control. It's really not fair to hold people accountable for something that they can't. And a great example of this might be rent. So, let's say that you pay rent on your rick house, and that is worked into the production budget. When you're analyzing the actual versus budget results for production, I would advise you to and let me add, when you're using that analysis to judge someone's performance, I strongly encourage you to um, ignore the things that are out of their control and judge only on their ability to meet goal and things that are in their control. An example might be rent. Insurance is another great example. Usually the head of production or whoever is managing your rick house is not going to be in charge of negotiating insurance rates. So I thoroughly believe in using a budget to hold your department leaders accountable, but don't penalize them for things that are outside of their control. Other best practices here. When is it appropriate to recast a budget? So, unusual sustained circumstances, and the keyword is sustained, like a pandemic. If there's something that happens that just like, knocks your expectations out of reality, there's no use in perpetuating a budget that is not based in reality. Let's say that there was a fire at your facility. Your budget would not be relevant any longer. Um, I recommend doing a semi-annual review where you're taking a look at a budget on a every 6 month basis and making sure that it's still rooted in reality. There might be big enough gaps that you want to recast the budget. If you get to July and things are just not tracking, like maybe you budgeted at the beginning of the year to open a new market in March, and it looks like that's not going to open until September. maybe it's a good idea to recast it for the last half of the year again, because you want to root yourself in reality. Um, Explain the differences. And actually, one more thing before I get into this next section, it's not appropriate to recast a budget just because you're consistently not meeting budget. That is not the purpose at all. So, there should be a difference between actual and budgeted numbers. So if you're just kind of always tweaking it to make it match what you think is going to happen, that's not really helpful. Explain the differences. So next section is when reviewing the budget versus actual results, the purpose is not to punish the department heads for being off the mark, but to understand why actual results were different than what was anticipated. And if you ask why enough times to, like you keep peeling the onion of why, you'll get to a kernel of actionable truth, and that actionable truth will give you information that you can use to tweak the operations and drive you closer to your desired outcome. Another thing that I highly recommend is to ask department heads to present their own department's results to the team. If you have a monthly review session, have the salespeople present the sales findings, have the production staff, your head of production, go over COGS and explain why there might have been variances that weren't anticipated. And then the biggest point of all is to take action. So once you understand why a result is different than what was budgeted, understand what type of action item or behavior needs to result to change the outcome. That's the whole reason why we write a budget. We want to give ourselves a North Star of where we want the company to go. And you're not going to get there unless you sort of make these little tweaks along the way to adjust the path. So that's the sum of it. This is my information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I work in Los Angeles. My firm is headquartered here, but have clients all over the country and work with a ton of distilleries. If you have any kind of basic questions about budgeting, accounting, and finance, highly recommend the Distillery Finance book through ADI, and you can get it on the ADI website. You can get it on Amazon. It's called Distillery Finance. I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.